$650K budget. Should you be buying in regional Victoria or Metro Melbourne?
If the deal makes sense, you need to value it comparative to other properties in that pocket.
So many areas in regional Victoria and Metro Melbourne are looking really good.
We've assembled one of our biggest lineups ever to ask them what would they buy, where would they buy it, and why would they buy it? Regional Vic versus Metro Melbourne. Kicking things off with property investor and head of research at InvestorKit, Arjun Paliwal.
When you have this much logic attached to it, growth is definitely happening right now. Not going to happen, it is happening.
Next up, Bushell, property investor and mortgage broker from Full Circle Finance, gives his pick with a real lending structure flavour to it.
If you start acquiring properties with lower yields, there's actually quite a big ripple effect on how the trajectory of the portfolio could look.
Next, Sammy Gordon, founder of APS with a mammoth portfolio, finally starts talking locations. Why don't we jump into the web?
In all honesty, at that sort of budget, I'm liking.
Next, Steve Ash with a $10 million portfolio, a founder of Property Strats, opens up his what, where, and why.
I see investing as a real long-term thing. If something does happen, I'd much rather be in one of these areas.
Next on the panel, property investor with a $13 million portfolio, Rohit Gehlot, giving an answer that might surprise a few of you.
There is a very big disparity between median incomes and house prices. The properties under 650, these properties are massively undervalued.
And rounding out our expert panel, Dawn Fouhy, property investor with a $10 million portfolio, shares with us her what, where, and why, so we can find out what's the crack. The crack is $650,000.
This is always one of my favourite spots, and people moving out there for affordability.
Keeping track of all the detail is our investor scoreboard that we're going to throw to throughout the episode, so you don't miss any of the detail, the charts, the data, and opinions from our expert panel of property millionaires. Are there any kind of you should be aware of this though?
One of the biggest issues you have in Melbourne, in Victoria in general, both regionally and metro, is your...
If you've been wondering, $650 better spent in Metro Melbourne, or is it better in regional Victoria? This is the episode you've been waiting for, with the contrast and opinions from some of the most successful property investors in the country. You're about to learn some very in-depth detail on Metro Melbourne versus regional Victoria. My name's Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and this episode is powered by InvestorKit, Full Circle Finance, Suburbs Finder, Property Strats, and Futureproof. More about our amazing show sponsors in the show notes below. Right now, let's jump straight into this episode and kick things off with Mr. Arjun Paliwal. Arjun Paliwal. How you going, man?
I'm going good, Todd.
Mate, it's good to have you on here, and thank you for actually taking the time out, because if you've been watching the show for a little while, you're normally suited and booted, ready to go now, and I think I've just got you back from the gym in Dubai. So thank you for actually taking time out for this one, bro.
Yeah, it's all good, man. I'm here on the other side of the world recording today. Been actually in Dubai a lot, meeting many expat clients of ours. So I'm surprised by how many Aussies who live and work in the UAE, but obviously do envision themselves coming back at some point. So they're still trying to make sure they can invest back home.
Yeah, man. Any plans on moving over there yourself, taking advantage of the whole tax-free lifestyle?
Nah, this is actually a really cool thing to talk about. I feel like no matter what we hear sometimes in the media or things going on in the world, or when you look at that tax statement, I mean, look, I pay 7 figures in tax, so it's a lot, right, going in there. But when I look at that, I say to you honestly, because there's no bias, I feel very blessed to be in the position that I'm in, because that allows me to travel and live wherever I want. And genuinely move my whole lifestyle, live a really high quality life in another city, and say, I want to call this place home and I want the best of the best in that area. And still today, even after traveling to so many parts of the world, I would still choose Australia. Even if they want to take 47 cents on the dollar away from me, I would still choose Australia. That just goes to say something about how lucky we all are and how grateful I am. It's such a special part of the world to live in.
Man, you travel at a slightly different standard to me right now, but I'm with you, man. There's a reason Australia is so expensive. It's because it is such a good space. But I don't want to turn this into a massive patriotical episode, but
And that's coming from a Kiwi. Remember, I was born and brought up in New Zealand,
actually, yeah.
Right? So for this level of patriotism to be in the mix means it must be really good.
Absolutely, man. Well, let's start talking about a few isolated places in Australia, more specifically Victoria, and then more specifically, again, the whole flavour of this $650 budget. Are we talking Metro Melbourne or regional Victoria? But before we get into your choice with this, we're dividing this up into a what, where, why. But is there anything you wanted to set the stage with before we start unpacking all that, man?
Yeah, I'd say this is a really, really good point because 650 is becoming that budget in this higher interest rate environment, although it's coming down, where a lot of people's budgets suddenly, like, even if they didn't intend to, end up there. But what I would say is that you should be very surprised with the difference that 650, 750, 850, 950 makes in cities like Melbourne or Victoria, because if you do stretch that a little bit out, these choices change drastically. And so at this stage, though, let's lock in on 650 and just realize that for the audience, though, that if you go to 800, different game, 950, different game, million different games. So be ready for these little budget changes to make big differences in decisions.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's actually a really valid point to make. It's like 650, great. And it's still a reasonable budget to be working with, especially as an investor. But sometimes the difference between 650 and 750, it's a lot more than the 100 grand that you're paying. That's what you're saying, yeah?
Absolutely.
Gotcha, man. All right. Well, let's start with the what. What are you buying first up? Are we talking townhouse? Are we talking house? I'd be very surprised if you said unit.
Yeah, you would be surprised. It's definitely house. And I would range just in that budget between a 3-bed, 1-bath to a 4-bed, 2-bath. I know that covers basically everything. But when I say the range, I say the range as in like people's ability to renovate and comfortability to renovate. Like if you could choose a 4 and 2 that's not so well done.
Well, like cosmetic sort of stuff?
Yeah, like carpets, paint, some kitchen tap finishes or bathroom minor finishes, shower heads, taps, all that sort of stuff. So if you could spend up to that 25K, then fit in the most beds and baths you can with the ugliest home you can, and then see the touch-ups that you can make, right? And then if you can't fit in or don't feel comfortable with renovations, managing them in the distance or unaware of the works or the upside, then a nicer 3-in-1, 3-in-2 won't take away from the great outcome, but it's just probably where you end up landing. So that's kind of the what house, and where in that house range is like that.
Gotcha. Okay. And I hear what you're saying. So if it's a light sort of cosmetic, and it sounds like very light cosmetic, different story. But you're not talking about any kind of structural redoing bathrooms, kitchens, that kind of stuff. It is the gentle stuff. Yeah, gotcha. All right. Now, as far as the where is concerned, this is kind of the $64 million question. Are you going regional Vic or are you going Metro Melbourne?
Look, if we're talking 650 and under, whilst it's not a bad play to be in Metro Melbourne, I'm going regional Vic for this one.
Okay, whereabouts?
Man, this is tough. By the way, regional Vic, don't think I'm hating on your other cities when I say one city. Todd's put me up to the one city. The one city I'm going to select is Wodonga. But when it comes to the cities in play, like you got no shortage of great options. You got the Mildura, the Geelong, the Ballarat, the Bendigos. But I'll pick Wodonga a little bit just for now.
To be fair to Arjun, and actually I think almost everyone that's been on this panel, I'm really pressing for one city. So to give you guys a little bit more sort of specificity, but I'm backing up what you're saying, man, like, because it doesn't mean that this is the only play. It's just, okay, if we have to hone it in, this is where you're honing in on.
That's right. I'm going to pick Wodonga for this one, especially for this episode to go deeper into, but also just that it is doing what I see it doing.
And when you say it's doing what you see it doing, expand on that. What are you seeing as far as the stats and the data?
Yeah, so I'll tackle it from an emotion and logical point of view for both sides. From a logical point of view, the activity just can't be questioned. Like when we look at some of the data, we see prices already up 11.2% from the last 12 months.
Oh, wow.
And that is about almost double the national average, or at least close to double the national average during that same time. Sales volumes are up 18% over the last 12 months. So a lot more buying activity is happening. Days on market is down 20% over the last 12 months. So people are buying faster. Rents, a place where Victoria, people have been talking about yields and could they be better? Well, rents are up 10.6% over the last 12 months. And so that is a massive, monstrous rental boom, reminding me of 2021 days when we saw post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Finally...
Sorry, just to quickly jump in. What are the yields? Unless that's what you're about to say.
Absolutely. The yields are, 4.9, depending on which data set you take, are down to about 4.4. So we're looking starting with a 4 and getting closer to 5 with some affordable assets in that range, but usually with the 4s in front.
All right, cool. So you're almost looking at a 5% yield in some cases, but otherwise down into a 4s. Maybe if you're going for that 4-bed, 2-bath, something a little bit bigger, a little bit sort of pricier, then your yield might be compressed a little bit more.
Yeah, it depends on if you've got that reno potential, because when you get the reno potential and you do touch it up, sometimes you get that purchase price a little bit low and the yields pick up nicely. But another thing to point out is that alongside the sales volume expansion, you also see listings getting constricted. Listings are down over 20% as well, 20% to be precise over the last 12 months. So the listings now are like the second lowest they've been in the last 10 years. The only time where listings were this low in Wodonga was in 2021. And to be precise, it was around June 2021, between June and sort of like Feb of 2022. There was a 6 to 7 month period where the listings were at the lowest they've been. So the suburb of Wodonga right now is now almost at that point, about 10% higher than that point, but that's the lowest in 10 years of data. And like to give you some real context around where those listings have sat traditionally, well, between 2015 and 2020, those listings were about 3 times higher than the lowest point. And so the listings are almost 3 times lower than that higher average of 2015 to 2020. So you can see, like, when you have this much logic attached to it, and I put emotion aside, it's very compelling as a story to say growth is definitely happening right now. Not going to happen, it is happening. As for the emotion sides, like, me and you have got more to comment on this because of a recent on-the-ground visit as well. But that's just the logic sides I want to cover off first.
Yeah, you and I spent a bit of time in both Albury and Wodonga. But I'm really interested in this, though, because the sales volume going up 18%, listings going down 20%, rents are going up, the yield is already pretty good, 11.2% over the last 12 months. Like, everything is coming up Millhouse for Wodonga. As far as the affordability and the long-term sort of play for this, are you looking at this as like this is more of a, you could get in for a few years and then exit? Or is this more of a, no, like you can really actually plant the seed here a little bit longer term? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I initially used to think when I was looking at this market last year and we were re-entering for clients, I thought to myself, okay, it might have a little bit of a couple of years. But then the more and more I go from visiting the city to reviewing some of the economic trends, fundamentals is what lengthens a cycle. Too many people look at market data and have this real simplistic view. The last 10 years equals X, therefore the next 10 years equals X. Well, if we took that logic, Wodonga would not have grown 12% over the last 12 months. Why did it grow? Because the 10-year average has been really strong in Wodonga, so surely it can't be growing again, but it did. And this is where people don't understand fundamentals. Example, this is not the only city that's played out. Like, I mean, Hobart did the same thing. The amount of people that you and I both know, Todd, like that said, 2018, Hobart's done. 2019, Hobart's done. 2020, Hobart's done. 2017, Hobart's done. 2021. So, like, of course, you're going to get it right eventually. If you're like even a broken clock eventually gets the time right? So
twice a day.
So from that perspective, twice a day. From that perspective, Wodonga is very much the same, being that 10 years, the growth is very strong, but you've got 3 fundamentals going for it right now. First fundamental is you've got a jobs market that's increasing and improving with some key projects across defense, medical as 2 key areas really driving a fair bit of activity. The second fundamental that you've got going is the gentrification and affordability. Right now, a lot of first home buyers are making up a healthy audience of buyers when it comes to Wodonga, not from my data, but from on the ground source of truth when speaking with some of the largest market share agencies on the ground. And they said about first home buyers coming in, even though it's had a 10% increase, it wasn't like a 10% going up to $1 million price point. It's a 10, 11% going to a mid-sixes price point. And so that's another compelling story to say it's great growth happening, but it's still affordable. Yeah. And then the third part is investors interstate. Investors interstate and locally are all looking at this market to go jobs, lifestyle, affordability, improving conditions, data points, yield, price points that are now not only attractive to me, but also attractive to first home buyers. And they just put all the things together. And if they carry this investor checklist, they're ticking like 7 out of 10 points. And so there's that comfortability from an investor buyer base, which, 3 in every 10 transactions is typically the investor in Australian property ownership. And then you've got the first home buyer base, 1 to 2 in every 10 transactions. And then you've also got the established base that goes, I better upsize, downsize, and it might be a good opportunity now because of this market movement. So everyone's getting active. And then you've got jobs, lifestyle, affordability still there. So from that perspective, it's a strong move.
Man, tell me about the downsides, because right now, everything you're saying is a massive play for not only short-term potential gains, but also over that longer term, it's still looking like a pretty safe place to keep your money. Are there any kind of like, all right, you should be aware of this though?
Yeah, look, I'd say like any market, the only thing that you should stay wary of is that when you've got a small market where transactions can move really quickly, you've got to recognize that it's not so much a disadvantage of Wodonga, but it's a mistake that people make as humans. people are going to see less stock. In fact, it's like almost the lowest it's ever been in 10 years, right? A couple more sales occur and then suddenly it is the lowest. But now when you look at that low supply, people commonly make mistakes. I'm going to quickly overpay. I'm going to buy something on a main road. I'm going to buy the worst possible house in the worst possible area just to squeeze in because I think this is going up. Yeah, I know there's a lot of defects on this one, but that's okay. Let's just go with it.
So the justification starts.
And people don't recognize that, like, when you have issues and all this sort of stuff, like at some point you may want to sell this. At some point you may want to have that occur. And like, I like to believe this when it comes to buying, I don't mind if things take a little bit longer. And the reason why I say this is that people forget that the average buyer is refreshing their pre-approval almost 2 times. So that's 6 months. The pre-approval is 90 days. Yeah. So like the average person doing 6 months, so 3 to 4 months, 2 to 3 months is not the end of the world if you're taking time to get that right one. And so I feel like that's another thing to consider.
Okay. So don't get FOMO. Don't just rush in for the sake of everything looking good and then make a decision that later on you're going to go, okay, could have done that a lot better.
Yeah,
got it. So, but as far as why Wodonga over Bendigo, over Ballarat, over everywhere else, because I know that you kind of push these all so close together in a lot of cases. Is there a reason why you did choose it over the top? Or is it just because it's like, Todd, because you told me to choose one?
Yeah, look, it is a little bit of a, you told me to choose one. But if I was to highlight some things with Wodonga right now, it's that, and this is a big issue we see in Melbourne commonly. Like, by the way, Melbourne not being selected as my option, it doesn't mean it's a bad option when it comes to like the sub 650. I select it all day, every day on higher budgets. But when it comes to sub 650, when you're looking at Melbourne, you think of it as, I'm finding this one city. Then I have to find this one little suburb. And I hope it really, because from what I can see the data points, I hope it does everything so much better than this city does. And history would say you're likely to be wrong. Usually the suburbs and the overall city don't separate long term with each other. And so you finding that super amazing suburb might last for a little bit, but the longer and longer you hold it, the less it lasts. And so when you look at it that perspective, you're hoping for something to really do something special in comparison to something that isn't doing something special yet, but it is growing, it is recovering, and it is getting better. Whereas with Wodonga, outside of West Wodonga, Wodonga is the city of Wodonga. Therefore, if Wodonga's data points are that convicting, and the same can be said with Mildura as an example, but when you look at that, it's just clear to go, that data's strong. There's nothing 2 cents about it. There's no like, this suburb's looking good, these aren't, stay away from these pockets, it's that suburb, go to here. No, it's just clear that that looks better. So I feel like if you've got that smaller budget and you're really hoping for it to be like, let's do something with this budget, let's make a move, if it does something well, it's just the odds are in your favor when you see a whole city doing something versus you're trying to hope that one suburb and part of a city that does something, does it sooner, does it immediately, does it better, and does it for longer, all that sort of stuff.
Okay, if I'm understanding you right here, there's a few pockets potentially in Melbourne that are seeing some serious growth at the moment, but because it's such a big area, it's like just because you might have got a really good run over the last 12 months, it doesn't necessarily mean that run's going to continue. That might start to spill over and then start averaging out across the rest of the metropolitan area. Have I understood you right?
Yeah, that's it.
Got it. All right, so 650,000. You're going 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, not much to do. Or 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, very light cosmetic. We're talking regional Vic, not Metro Melbourne, more specifically Wodonga. And as far as the why is concerned, really it's sounding like because everything is pointing in the right direction for this area, plus everything is pointing in the right direction for it maybe over a longer term instead of, and again, not to say that Metro Melbourne's bad, but instead of what could potentially be a short-term sugar hit in a few Metro Melbourne areas with the 650K budget. And is there anything else that you want to wrap up with this one, Arj, before we part ways and let you get back to the gym?
No, that's everything from my side.
Perfect. Arjun Paliwal from Investigate. Thank you so much again for jumping on the show, man.
Thank you, mate. Cheers.
So Arj is realistically picking a 4-bed, 2-bath house in Wodonga. He's going regional Victoria. And the why behind it? There's solid data really supporting long-term potential growth. Next up, it's time to talk with property investor and mortgage broker Morgan Bushell to find out what, where and why regional Victoria or Metro Melbourne. Morgan Bushell, how you going, man?
Good, thanks, Todd. How are you?
I'm pumped, man. I'm looking forward to your slot on this because we're talking to so many great people as far as the property investing side's concerned. You're the only broker we've got on the panel. So I already know you're going to bring a different perspective to this, still wearing your investor hat, but also bringing your mortgage broker and scalability with the finance side of things hat. I guess the 2 hats. What are you? But before we get into the what, the where, and the why, is there anything you really want to set the stage with, mate?
So I think the main thing I want to get into, especially from an investing side of things, is look, there's things we can control, and specifically like the type of property and the rental yields. And what we'll find when we go through this is if you start acquiring properties with lower yields versus slightly higher ones, there's actually quite a big ripple effect on how the trajectory of the portfolio could look going forward.
This is what I knew you'd prep, and this is what I'm excited to pull apart, man, because it comes back to that age-old question that, I don't know if it's age-old, it's probably not in Sanskrit or anything, but if I can't answer the question, how is this one going to help me get in that one? Should I really be buying it? So Morgan's going to be pulling apart that in detail, but if we want to start with the what then, what are we actually buying? Are we looking at a townhouse, a unit, a house, a renovator? What's on the cards, mate?
Yeah. So sticking to, I guess, a house, so something that's a bit kind of standard, I guess it's probably the thing that most people would want to buy. So we're working off that to begin with.
And a house that's like more of a standard investment property, 3-bed, 1-bath, or are you maybe looking something newer? What are you thinking?
Looking around those sort of stats, I mean, for the sort of markets, that's kind of average where we're kind of working. So inner ring versus regional. Look, it's nice to get more, but we're kind of working with the 3. So one thing we're kind of sticking to is those 3-bedroom type houses, because when you go for the 4-bedroom ones, typically the purchase price versus rental yield is just not as strong. And also you're not as appealing to most of the market. So we're sticking to what is most common.
Got it. Okay. So 3 bedrooms, 1 bath. And last question before we get into the where, any kind of value add to this? Are you looking at this of a subdivision potential renovation, or we're talking about something that's already done, renting it out, it's set?
This is one where you're just going to press buy and then you're done. That's it.
Press buy and done. I love it. All right. And as far as the where's concerned, are we talking Metro Melbourne or Regional Vic?
I'm actually going to do something a little bit different to everyone else. And that's where I'm going to look at both and then kind of compare both of them and ultimately kind of recommend where I would go and why.
Love this. All right. Because you're doing it a little bit different to everyone else, Morgan, how do you want to start this, man? Where do you want to begin?
Yeah. So I want to kick it off by focusing on regionals first before we get into the metro ones.
Okay. Easy. What do you got planned?
Okay, so we're sticking to, I guess, the 650K purchase price in this sort of area. And we're focusing on, I guess, doing 2 at the 650 mark. Now, being regional, obviously rental yields are a little bit more favorable. So we're kind of going with about a 4.4% rental yield for regional Victoria.
And anywhere specific regionally? Are you focused more on the Ballarats, the Bendigos, the Sheppartons? Where are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking like Ballarat or even maybe like Bendigo, for example. You can get those higher yields if you negotiate well. So looking in those markets to begin with.
All right. So a Ballarat or a Bendigo, 4.4% yield. What are we looking at as far as how this then starts playing out the way you've put it together?
Yeah. So I guess we're using a scenario where it's someone, for example, who's earning a decent amount of income. Maybe they're living at home rent-free. They've maybe saved up enough money to also buy these properties with savings. So that's the assumption we're working off for both, by the way. But to get that first property from a borrowing capacity perspective, we're starting with major banks. So, for example, this first one, we'll be doing it with CBA.
Got it. Okay.
And from a borrowing capacity perspective, if you're buying, say, a 650K property and we're doing a 20% deposit, that means your loan has to be 520. For that very first property, though, with CBA, being living at home, earning decent money, your borrowing power is going to be much stronger than that. The maximum borrowing power in this example is 764,000.
Okay. All right. And this is for rental property number 1, correct?
Yes, in the regional centre.
And now this is the unique thing that Morgan's doing that no one else is. You're now about to connect this into a rental property number 2. How does this actually flow on from that if we're talking regional?
Exactly, yeah. So it's all good and well to buy what's in front of you, but I find the really good investors say, hey, Morgan, if I buy this one, what does the next one look like? Which bank is that going to be with? What does my cash flow look like? So this is where we kind of show the difference between and the multiplier effect of yields.
Beautiful, mate. Okay, what are we looking at then for the next one? Which bank are we with? What yields do we need to hit? What do the targets look like?
Yeah. So look, we're keeping a few things constant just so it's a, apples with apples comparison.
Yep.
But for this second one, so again, 650K purchase, 20% deposit. Nothing's changed about this person and where they live, what they earn, etc. But the next bank we need to go to is a second tier bank. And The one I'm talking about is one that's at the top end of these banks. So they're called Resimac, if you happen to know them. The maximum loan we can achieve there is about 530. So it's getting pretty close to that limit of what would be 520 to get the deal done.
Okay, so but it's achievable.
It is, yeah. Like it's definitely doable. I mean, this bank, it sounds like it's, second tier and it's, what it is, but interest rates at the time of recording this, it's about 5.94% for investment on interest only.
How good. Okay, so investment on interest only, 5.9%, and that's with a 20% deposit, you said?
Correct, yeah.
Now, a quick question on that then. If it was a 10% deposit, still that same interest rate or that's changing?
No, it would go up.
All right, so 5.9%, and this is with a 20% deposit. So basically, if we're going regional Victoria, we're buying with a 4.4% yield. Now, this is one of the keys that you've got here as well.
Yeah.
Then you can get into the next one with a second tier lender, but a second tier lender that's got a pretty good interest rate. Is there anything else you want to say on the wear factor before we then move into your comparison on Metro Melbourne?
No, I'm actually pretty good with this. So I'm keen to now compare how this goes against the inner ring of Melbourne.
Love it. All right, man. What are we looking at?
So like the first scenario, we're sticking to your same sort of 650 purchase price. It's definitely doable in the inner ring, but the main thing is yield. So we're going for a lower rental yield of 3.8% instead.
And whereabouts?
So this is kind of like, I guess, anywhere that's sort of within 15 to 20 Ks of the CBD. So places, I guess, as far out as maybe like Broadmeadows, for example, like that kind of inner ring of Melbourne.
Okay, and a 3.8% yield, realistically, pretty standard. Like you're not talking about anything terrible. You're not talking about anything amazing. You don't go into Melbourne because you want high cash flow properties.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. And so modeling this out, as far as the first purchase is concerned, does anything change or is it just when we get into the second one that everything changes?
No, look, so it'd be the same bank. It'd still be CBA in this example. Look, the borrowing power is about 30 grand less than the first one.
Okay.
So already we're starting to see a bit of an impact here. When we get to the second one, the impact's actually much bigger. So yeah, first one's doable, ripple effect to the next one, much bigger.
All right. Talk us through the second one, man. Then you've piqued my interest. How much difference?
Yeah, literally like the last scenario, capping the purchase price, deposit, everything about the person, etc. Now, if we were to go to the exact same bank from the previous kind of scenario, Resimac, we actually would not be able to get the loan with them. So going off the 520 loan requirement to get it done, you'd actually only be able to get about 470 with Resimac. So we're not going to get it done. We're 50 grand short.
So it's actually denied.
Yeah, like you wouldn't get the loan. It's just not enough borrowing power.
Yeah, right. Okay. And as far as options are concerned though, and this, if you've been watching the show for a while, you've seen episodes that Morgan and I have done or just like in general, you'll always hear us say, talk to your broker, talk to an investment savvy broker. This is one of the reasons, because if you were to go, is it what bank are you talking about then? It was Resimac, you said?
Yeah.
If you were to talk directly to Resimac, you'd be like, oh, okay, well, I can't do anything. Then, but I'm pretty sure Morgan's about to pull a rabbit out of the hat and go, well, actually you can. It might be a bit different. It might cost you a little bit more, but there are other options. But it's about actually understanding these different options, and you're not going to get that dealing directly with one lender. So I don't want to steal too much of your thunder with this then, Morgan, but how does this then unfold as far as other options ahead?
No, you hit the nail on the head. It's never a no, because there's always a bank that will want to lend you $1. And in this scenario, look, Resimac says no, but that's fine because there's more options. So the next bank we could go to is another second tier bank, similar name, but they're called First Mac. So they would be the next in line where you could then get the lending from.
I'm surprised they're not the first Mac in line before Resimac.
Oh gosh.
How good was that? Yeah, I write my own jokes, believe it or not. Anyway. Let's keep moving. So as far as the difference then, so they're getting approved for enough to make the deal happen. What's the interest rate difference though?
So 20% deposit with this bank, it is different. So we're looking at 6.39 at the time of recording this compared to the 5.94% with Resimac instead.
Okay, so look, you definitely, your cash flow is going to look different, but it's not like it's a whole percent or 2% or like anything like crazy different. It's just, it's a bit more.
It's not a massive punch in the face, but yeah, it's actually not that bad. I mean, a few months ago, this was actually quite good. So yeah, I think in the scheme of things, it's pretty good.
And I think the really interesting thing to take away from the way that Morgan's put this together as well is this is a connection between rental 1 and rental 2. Now, if you were to then continue to build, which let's face it, if you're watching this show, that's more than likely what you've got in mind. You wanted to then go to rental 3, rental 4, rental 5. All of these little incremental changes can be the difference between actually getting into number 4 or just being completely property denied. So being able to actually understand this, Morgan, it's crucial to portfolio growth. And I'm going to guess your where is then going to be Regional Vic because of this?
Yeah, I think if it's someone that is wanting to preserve their borrowing power as much as possible, yeah, regional makes a lot of sense. I think if you're wanting to maybe potentially have a bit more of a bet on capital growth and be closer to the action of the CBD and you don't mind the cash flow hit, then yeah, like the inner rings for you.
All right, so as far as the where, we're talking regional Victoria. I want to know an area though, that you just kind of said loosely before, like maybe a bit of Geelong or Ballarat, or where are you picking?
Yeah, so I'm torn between, I guess, Bendigo and Ballarat if I had to pick two.
Okay, and if you had to pick one, so Ballarat or Bendigo, which one are you backing?
Yeah, I have to go with Ballarat. That's a market that I'd back for sure.
Ballarat. And anywhere specific in Ballarat, or just like Ballarat is the place?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's pockets. I think Sebastopol's quite popular, like Mount Pleasant's another one, for example. But overall, you can't go too wrong with that market.
All right, so if you're willing to take a little bit more of the hit and maybe you've got some better serviceability because of a higher income, or you've already got an established portfolio with some solid cash flow, Metro Melbourne, you're not saying it's a no, but you've got to take this into consideration with portfolio growth. If you are looking at building your portfolio and the cash flow is a really significant part of it, which let's face it, for most of us it is, then regional Victoria is potentially going to be a better bet for you. Zooming in even further, we're talking about a house, more likely a 3-bed, 1-bath house in Ballarat, Sebastopol or Mount Pleasant. So we're talking about getting into the higher yielding locations within already a regional pocket that has a higher yield compared to a lot of Metro Melbourne locations. Mate, is there anything I've left out on that wrap up, or any final words of wisdom you want to throw into this there, Morgan?
No, not really. I mean, we kind of touched on it. I think with whatever you've got in mind in front of you, you almost want to know what that next step ahead looks like, just so you don't completely stuff yourself up. So really important just to work with someone that does that kind of modeling for you, just so you really know what's next.
100%. Morgan Bushell from Full Circle Finance, thank you so much for jumping on the show again, mate. It's always good fun.
Cheers, Todd. Appreciate it.
So for Morgan Bushell, a 3-bed, 1-bath house as far as the where in Ballarat. So naturally, he's picking regional Victoria. And the reason behind it, the why. Higher yields compared to Metro Melbourne locations, really helping you push the growth of your portfolio. Next up, let's talk with Sammy Gordon from Australian Property Scout to find out his answer to what, where and why, regional Victoria or Metro Melbourne. Sammy Gordon, how you going, man?
Big Todd Sloan, mate, doing very well, man, doing very well. Good to be recording with you once again.
Mate, it's good to have you back on the pod. It's been too long, and it's going to be a really good episode for a lot of people. Areas are not the kind of thing that you tend to talk a lot about, mate. So I think there's going to be a whole lot of people leaning forward when they see the name Sam Gordon and we're talking about areas, mate.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I know. It was you and I caught up a couple of weeks ago, man. It's been a minute since you and I recorded, since I was last down in Adelaide, mate. So, yeah, man. Looking forward to diving into the first one of these with yourself and, mate, sharing what I can from my side and my perspective on the market right now.
Awesome, man. Well, is there anything you wanted to set the stage with before we get into the what are you buying, where are you buying it, and why, in contrast to regional Vic or Metro Melbourne? Anything you want to set it with?
Man, I think you and I were talking off air about this a couple of days ago, just like setting the sort of tone around it and the fact that it could sort of like the reasons for why potentially one area over another. And man, I'm going to touch to begin with on like as we dive into this, probably my comparison from a city perspective versus a regional in terms of which I would look at, but what I still would like and what I would look at from a perspective of what I would actually like to see in that location closer in as well versus further out, and put it in essence, man, why I kind of sort of have two, but I will pick one out of the equation. So
okay, all right. So you're kind of hedging the bets a little bit, but you still nail it into one.
A little bit.
Okay. All right, man. Well, then why don't we just jump straight into that? What are we talking about? Because, look, man, you've built a huge portfolio, and I know you've done well in houses. You've also bought units. You bought blocks of units.
Yes.
Like, as far as the asset type, you're after the deal. But what are you seeing right now as that potential deal with asset type?
For sure, man. So I think it's an interesting time in the market right now where units actually have got a place back in investment portfolios once more. In terms of in this location with this amount of money, would I be looking at a unit? The answer is no. But it is interesting you sort of bring that back up, because it's coming back around where certain units for certain investors may actually play a decent role in their portfolio moving forward, especially young investors starting out, stronger yields. Potentially a lot of the time you don't get quite as much growth, but that isn't always the case. So it's always a bit of case by case, especially location wise. But for example, man, I bought this deal in Brisbane. It was a unit for $155,000 back in 2019. I just sold sold it for 450K. So the time of units coming back into their own, it is now. There's a few that they've done massive dashes like that. That thing's tripled, man, and that's virtually tripled in that time frame. So there is value around that right now if you're knowing where you're looking. But in this equation, in this conversation that we're looking at, that's not the case. For me, for 650K in Victoria, I'm not talking units.
If I gave you a different budget, and I don't want to drill down too much because I've got to keep us on track, would it change your answer, like in Victoria?
I think there's enough housing markets at enough budgets where, look, if I was to go regional, I wouldn't be looking at units, right? I don't like units regionally unless I'm buying the block. Yep. And then we're talking a very different price point. But in almost, I've assessed that market within Melbourne as well. And I think for the money that you can buy in those markets compared to the housing markets you can buy externally and regionally, price point doesn't even really weigh into the equation for me right now with units in that market. I think there's better value elsewhere in housing external from Melbourne.
Got it. Okay. So you're looking at a house. And now is this like
Yes.
3-bed, 1 bath, or you going 4-bed, 2, renovator? What are you thinking?
Mate, to give the contrast between the two, and what I'll dive into first is probably the closest thing that I assessed when I looked at the two markets that I would potentially assess and look at. And if we give the one that to me was the slight loser in this equation, but still very much up there in the conversation if we look at this thing, I was looking very closely at both sort of like a Brimbank and Hume city councils, those LGAs. Obviously, you're looking for smaller houses at this sort of price point of 650. You're talking about 3x1s, but you can still get assets like that on larger blocks. I do like it. The biggest reason why I probably wouldn't actually choose this at this price point is it's a very difficult task to secure at this price point, a quality deal, quality homes, a good home that doesn't need a massive renovation because most people don't want to take that on a decent sized block in these locations. Budget wise, you're going to be struggling a little bit for that. So if I was able to secure it and you were able to get it at a discount and were able to get a good clean house, it probably would be my pick. But the issue is, can you actually get it at that money? And is it a realistic thing to give your listeners that as something to go out and chase? The answer is probably no.
Okay, so ideally, if you could secure it, it sounds like that would be your response. But you're looking at that going, we're kind of looking for like the needle in the haystack. It exists, but like it's hard to find. You
have to have good connections there in that marketplace to be able to secure deals at that sort of money, at that sort of price point that are good deals. But yes, if it was the equation, you knew you were getting good value on a deal like that going in there, then yeah, probably would be. I would be leaning towards that.
All right, so we're looking for more like a 3-bed, 1 bath, something that maybe if it needs a little bit of work, you're all right with it, but not like a full spec renovator. If it's got some extra value add potential, nice, good size block, everything stacked up in its favor to be like good quality home. As far as the where's concerned, so you're saying Brimbank, Hume, they would have made the cut, but they're not quite there. Where are we talking then, mate?
Yeah. And one final thing to sort of recap on that, I think like the amount of spending that's going in out there, like yes, there's estates coming out online and whatnot to the very far north. But I think the big thing to take into equation is build times are taking a massive time to come through. There's approvals and whatnot, but that actually coming online is a very different equation. But the amount of spending, the proximity to the city, and then obviously the new price points around the new government grants and whatnot as well for the first home 5% deposit scheme. There's a lot of impetus there to push that market in a pretty strong way. But again, securing at this sort of budget, a quality asset at this sort of budget is going to be a bigger struggle.
Well, and sometimes as well, you're talking about some of the areas where it's like you're building and it's like, okay, if you're actually going to buy the land and then build, but the cost of building and the land, we're putting that together versus actually buying an established place. Even if you've got to throw 50 grand at it, you're almost getting a free house in some cases. Like, do you know what I mean? Like it's just, it's so expensive to build out sometimes. To me, that kind of goes twofold. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, man. It's like you either get more people that actually start building and the building starts to happen, then those valuations are going to start stacking up and really ticking over, which 100%. Is then going to give you some good equity. Or they're just not going to build because the valuations don't stack up. It doesn't make financial sense. And then that's going to put more pressure on the supply that's currently there.
For sure. And the biggest issue is we're still seeing building prices increasing consistently. You know, in all our capital cities at the moment, there's this huge infrastructure spend going on. So you're getting huge amounts of trades moving to government funded projects, massive government funded projects, a lot of time under unions. So very favorable conditions as an employee, like as an actual worker, on very, very good salaries and whatnot as well. It's driving more and more people out of the private sector into the public, and they're taking a lot of people away from that. So that's providing that continual press and pressure on wages and on actual build prices because they don't have enough trades, along with obviously supply issues we've been struggling with for a while, but to actually get these projects off the ground too. So it's an interesting thing, man. Like they're getting harder and harder to be put together. And that's why we keep seeing this, 80 to 100,000 home deficit every year from the government's target. We're just not going to keep up with it. And these are the biggest issues for it.
100%, man. All right. Well, is there anything else you wanted to put into the what before we really drill into the where?
Nah, man, I think that's pretty good. And yeah, it just kind of recaps on what my primary sort of preference would be at that budget if we could make it work, but then happy to dive in outside of that.
All right, cool, man. Why don't we jump into the where?
The where for me at 650, and to me, I'm always looking at a spread. So I'm never looking at a specific price point exactly. So if someone comes to me with, let's say, we strategize a $650K budget that we've got to work out there, I'm typically looking between like a $100,000 radius, 50 to 100K radius of that price point. So if we're coming and we're working with 650K, I'm looking at what can I source for that money between 550 to 650. That's because if they've got a full 650, I typically don't want to fully exhaust that amount because we want to make sure we've got some room to strip some equity out of it if we need to. And also, like, if there's more room for a market to grow, being that slightly cheaper, if that's a great asset, great area to be buying in, I don't always want to fully exhaust that budget, if that makes sense.
Does this also come back to the borrowing capacity side of things for you as well?
For sure. And 650 a lot of the time, especially with, I know a lot of your listeners, like younger listeners, is starting out building their portfolios. We can retain borrowing capacity. One of the biggest issues you have in Melbourne, in Victoria in general, both regionally and metro, is your yields are extremely soft. So if you're working with extremely soft yields, the higher your price points goes, typically the further your yield drops off. So that's going to really sting you as you try and scale a portfolio. So that's where if we can play between that 550 to 650, that's where I see like you get some good, like better yield opportunities if we can stick a little bit lower towards that scale as well.
Soft yield. That's a very good way of putting it. I'd say a shit yield, but soft is much nicer.
Maybe it's a soft shitty yield. I love it.
All right. So we've got a swing from around 550 to 650. And I actually think Sam's pointing out a really, really valuable takeaway here as well. Just because you've got it to spend doesn't mean you should spend all of it. Leaving something in the tank is often a really, really good idea when you're looking for growth. So if you're looking now more so that 550 to 650, where's it taking us?
Just to play around a little bit with your modeling, eh? just to flip the script a little.
No one ever sticks completely to the rules. Everyone always changes it a bit. And I knew you were going to.
I love it. It's always the way, man. It's always the way. Man, in all honesty, at that sort of budget, I'm liking Ballarat at that money. Man, I'm liking proximity to the city. I'm also liking the fact of a few of the other markets, a lot of the other surrounding markets are already moving in a pretty strong way. Like we were talking before about human bring back, those markets are already in growth. You got a lot of other markets that are already moving into strong growth runs, especially in proximity to Ballarat. Ballarat is lagging a little bit from that sector, that specific growth run that we're seeing at the moment that has already started. So I like the fact that the market's a little bit softer. We can typically negotiate a slightly better discount on an asset like that as well. And for 550 to 650K, you're still able to buy 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, good condition, decent block size, a lot of the time decent vacancy rate around that as well. So you're still getting a reasonably tight vacancy rate around that. Your yield's still going to be shit, as you and I discussed before. But man, the story is no different anywhere else across the state as well. So if you're going to be going there, that's a sort of, I like that price point. I like that style of asset in there. There's a few different reasons. I mean, we'll get to the why in a second if you want to lead in. But is there any questions you had for me around, any deeper around that?
Yeah, a little bit more around the Ballarat side of things then. So out of interest, because I genuinely wasn't sure which direction you were going to go in. I purposely didn't ask you your full answer to this before we started because I kind of wanted to unfold it. But I'm kind of looking at this thinking there's still some areas in Ballarat where you can potentially pick up deals like in the 4s, put more money into it. And if you're looking at this, like, would you even consider that going back to more like the value add, higher yield kind of strategy? Or are you thinking like, no, those days are done. It is more set and forget now because of the kind of economic landscape we're in? Or what's your take on it?
So I think the interesting thing to unpack in this scenario is you would have recognized that the style of asset that I said for 550 to 650K was a 4-bed, 2-bath, newer build style home.
What I'm thinking.
For me, man, if we're dropping down another $100,000 and we're dropping down to 450, that's where we're walking into our older suburbs, our 3x1s. Like you can still buy that sort of asset in there. We're still buying those assets, no worries at all, at that sort of price point as well. So it definitely is possible. There don't even need to be renovation plays necessarily to be able to buy that style of asset at that sort of money. The reason why I like the 550 to 6, actually, if we drill down location wise as well, because I think that's what you want to know first, like really why in terms of the location. Man, you've got proximity, again, like I said, to a lot of areas that are already in strong boom. They're already in movement growth locations. They're already moving into boom city, boom territory locations. Okay. You've got also a lot of surrounding areas, surrounding LGAs that are sitting at different first homeowner grant sort of levels to allow them to go further in pricing. That means you're going to move into a proximity bias, almost like that ripple effect bias that we always spoke about, that was spoken about a lot back during the day. You're going to move into that where all of a sudden now, the outskirts of Melbourne might hit, $800, $900, $1 million for the same style of asset that at the moment we're talking about for circa 600K in Ballarat. Now, if there's people who legitimately owner occupiers, specifically first home buyers, younger demographics as well, who want to actually buy their own home, if they can't afford $900,000 to $1 million, but they can go that little bit further out, let's say an extra 30 minutes out, to be able to buy something for $200,000, $300,000 less, bigger house, better condition, all these sorts of things. things. Because what you got to remember is there's a floor that's created by these new grants, and there's a floor that will be created by the impetus and by the push that will be created off this as well. Now, if that floor is built under 3x1 homes, then if you can buy 4x2 home for $200,000 to $300,000 less, 30 minutes out on a big block that's a 2010 build versus a 1970s build, I know what a lot of people are going to start moving to, and we saw it happen in Sydney. You see it happen everywhere. Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, when these cities went through their booms. And I think we're going to see a very similar thing there. The additional thing combined with it is, even though the grant isn't at the same level as the city in Ballarat, I believe those bottom level of properties that we're talking about, like those, 450K 3x1s, where's the new floor going to be for them? Because if that's the bottom end of the market and that starts moving up, that's where I think we're going to see a lot of pressure on that bottom end of the market there, which will have that natural push on the next bracket of desirable homes for home buyers in the area, like your newer 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 600 square meter blocks, those style of assets, which they're already sitting at the floor. But if the bottom end gets pushed up by that next level of home buyer and investor, for not that much more, will be in that style of asset. So that natural push into that medium tier of a market, like we see so often happen and play out, that's where I see the value in a budget like this, in a location like that.
Pulling back to that reference that you gave earlier on. So it was like, what was it? The 2-bedroom, I'm assuming like a unit or a townhouse around Brisbane, Logan, something along those lines, 150 grand.
Yeah.
Same thing happened with them. That was the absolute bottom of the market. Houses rose first, and then all of a sudden houses went from 300 grand to 400-500 grand, and people were like,
700.
What the hell? What, these are only 150? And then they didn't stay at 150 for very long, and everything started rising up. But they weren't the first to rise. Are you saying a similar kind of thing should be playing out here?
We almost always see it, man. Like, you look at Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane right now, over the last 12 to 24 months, they've actually been three of the strongest performing markets. Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide unit markets have been three of the strongest performing markets. Literally, you look at that unit, man, I bought it in 2019. It didn't start growing until like the back end of 2022. And then in 2 years went from, I bought it well. So I paid 155, it was probably worth maybe high 100s, low 200s, something like that. But man, in a 2-year window, it went from low 200s to 450, like very, very quickly. So we're seeing like 40-50% growth like that, like almost like year on year. It's like they slingshot because there's that massive price disparity. And I do see a very similar thing playing out. That's why I like that the lack of heat is there, so you can negotiate better. But the way that these other markets surrounding it are moving from a growth perspective, I see that slingshot coming through. Literally, you look at, like, I don't need to mention specific areas. Everyone sort of knows these sorts of areas. But the surrounding areas, the pace that they're already moving at, combined with the new grant, the first time, the 5% deposit scheme, this thing playing out, I see that slingshot coming through. And the beautiful part, though, the part that I really like is looking for that mid-tier sometimes that'll see it in an even bigger level, at an even bigger level, because home buyers will prefer that over these, shitty little 3x1s in the shitty suburbs.
Saw an ad the other day as well on YouTube. I still can't bring myself to pay for premium. So
was it Bunnings?
No, it was
Macca's.
I can't remember. I can't remember what lender it was, man. But they were advertising the new 40-year mortgage.
Wow!
And I was just
wow.
It's here, because I know in Britain, I'm pretty sure they got 50-year mortgages.
It's crazy.
And when we talk about the lending side of things, the affordability side, it's like it's going to keep pushing this way. So which kind of rolls me into my question then of, if the heat's outside of it right now, you can still negotiate pretty good deals as far as like putting a deal together in Ballarat. How much longer are we talking? Is this more like it's set to play here, but don't expect growth in the next kind of 6 to 12 months? You're kind of planting the seed and you're expecting the tree in more like kind of 2-3 years? Or are you like, no, not quite that long? What are you thinking? You got a real smile on your face now.
It's already growing. The market's definitely already tightened up. It's just not growing as rapidly. So it's some of these other areas are like, man, no stock on market. It's lag data. This is I like when everyone runs off data sets. It's so lagged that like if that's the only thing you're running off, you're behind the 8 ball. Because like, man, people are trying to tell me, I don't know if it's going to be moving. I don't know if Melbourne's going to. Dude, Melbourne's already moving. You know what I mean? Like stock is almost non-existent there as it is now. It's been moving for a while, right? So it's like when you throw them in comparison, the rate of growth is lower and the heat is less, but it's still there. So you're still going to get growth. And that's why if you can buy well in 90 days post-settlement, you're going to have equity there to potentially strip. At absolute worst case, at 6 months post-settlement, you're going to have equity there because the market is moving. But the real pull and impetus and real push hasn't come yet. And I believe it'll come with the others as they keep moving through their strong cycles, especially home buyers, man. I think obviously investors are already there and home buyers are there. Obviously, they're both already there. But I strongly believe that like when these markets move into it, it's like that downgrading to the unit in Brisbane. It very quickly goes from an asset that you're looking at it and you go, that piece of shit's $155,000 2-bedroom, 2-story little piece of shit townhouse is never going to be worth $500,000 because I bought it for $155, or let's say it's worth worth 200 grand. And then in 2 years, man, all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, it's there. You know, it's there. So these are the ways sometimes that they play out. And that's why, man, me looking at it, like my gut feel is that this is very much going to play out. I don't only work off gut feel. Obviously, it always goes off. A lot of the time, the way I've seen markets work perfectly in this style of synergy and movement. And the biggest slingshots can sometimes come off the back of this as well.
So as far as why, I feel like we're kind of touching in and out of why, and I sort of answering it. But as far as the why Ballarat and why more so Regional Vic with this budget over actually getting something in, I mean, like easily in Melton, potentially if you're really going to roll up your sleeves, maybe in Dallas, in Broady and wherever.
Yeah.
Why are you picking Regional Vic?
Melton's biggest issue for me is has a massive supply issue in the wrong way. Not the supply issue that we want as investors, but in the other direction. Now that could be soaked up in time, but they have a massive land release sort of issue that causes some pretty big problems for that. I don't mind Melton, but man, like some of the postcodes have like over 10% vacancy rates. You know what I mean? Like crazy vacancy rates. The issue is that flows over to all the other postcodes as well in terms of like, it just makes it easier to negotiate rental properties down because there's so much of a blowout from that perspective. So I don't mind it, man. But like, yeah, if we're picking one over the other, my preference is there because vacancies are tighter. If anything, we've actually seen surprisingly vacancies tighten. A lot of Vic across regional Vic, across Metro Melbourne, we've seen vacancies start to blow out, across the board through a lot of the market. A lot of the markets are getting up towards 3%, which is quite high for a rental market, especially in the last 5 years. Go back 10 years, it wasn't that high, but now it's pretty high. We're seeing that tighten back up. Melton, we keep seeing it blowing out. So I don't mind it. And like fundamentally from Melbourne, it's a good play. But that side of things, that supply side of things is it's just unattractive to me. It always worries me. I don't like stock to be that loose. I don't like to take that long to lease properties. It's it wouldn't be my first pick, that's for sure.
I was surprised. Our rental took 3 weeks to actually get a tenant in it. I remember getting on the phone to the PM and it was like, what's this rental crisis? What's going on?
Yeah.
Everything else we've got, it's like instant. And there's 30 applications. It's like, it's full on, there's demand. But I hear what you're saying. There is definitely, and we're talking 13, 14 Ks away from Melbourne. So you're looking at Ballarat going, whilst there's still a different kind of vacancy issue from maybe other parts of the country, it's not the same as maybe some parts of Metro Melbourne. It more so like really referencing the Melton side of things, because you're right, the vacancy rate there is huge.
It's cooked, yeah.
I didn't know it was 10%, but I knew it was pretty massive.
There's a postcode that, from memory, actually, I was with the research team on Monday, man, and from memory, there's one postcode that's I might get this wrong, but from memory, there's one postcode right now that's sitting at 16 or 19%, something wild, something crazy. Yeah. So, and man, this is my issue with sort of councils that can be like that are very pro specky investment, develop, sell to super funds or whatever. Spruiking that style of deal. I'm always very wary of councils that are very pro that, and where we see a large amount of that coming, because that can take a lot of time to soak up, and they're all investors. They're typically not home buyers. So it always worries me a little bit when that's at play.
Mate, so all in all, wrapping this up, $650K budget, you're looking at a house, potentially not a 3-bed, 1-bath. You're looking at more like a 4-bed, 2 if you can get into it for this budget. We're looking regional Victoria, more specifically Ballarat. Is there a spot in Ballarat? Are we going, man, I'm surprised you've even given us an area. Can I push it any further, or is it just Ballarat?
Matt, I think there's enough within that it's like, I don't like to drill down so much on a specific suburb, so to speak, because with me, man, an LGA, I always find it funny when people like select the specific suburbs within an LGA or something that they'll only buy in. The simple fact, man, is like, you could have a 100% housing commission, or like, let's say a 99% housing commission bloody pocket or whatever. It's still going, all right, maybe not that crazy, but it's still even a heavily housing commissioned.
You've got the
suburb.
one house.
Yeah, that's what I was like, I really won't go to that level. But you literally could go to like that sort of extreme of like a very densely populated housing commission suburb in Ballarat. The whole of Ballarat doubles. There's no way that 50% housing commission, 50% privately owned homes, it doesn't also go through significant growth. If anything, it could grow further because it's a lower socioeconomic area that will start at a lower base rather than already being in demand by locals. So it can go further when uneducated investors come in and buy at the back end of the cycle, or desperate first home buyers, that's all they can afford to get in the market. That being said, we have like black zones we just won't buy in, like for specific reasons as it comes. But it's normally like we'll have a black zone of a suburb that we won't buy in that because of some sort of environmental risk or housing risk or something like that. Because it's not worth the potential headache that could come through with it, even with the growth potential. But yeah, man, outside of that, the LGA debate and drilling down to an LGA and then finding what in that LGA works for your budget. Are you a $400,000 to $500,000 investor, or have you got got 556, 650K to spend, and then drill down within that yourself, to find what's going to suit you best.
And what I'm really picking up from you from this conversation is nothing that is unusual to the Sam Gordon story, but it's like, don't bog yourself down into too much of the detail. Have your focus on the deal. Is this thing actually going to move you forward? Because that's really where you want to put in your focus. Is the detail important? Yes, but just don't have that as the absolute primary, because the actual property itself needs to be the thing that goes up in value and moves you forward, not if it's on this street or that street or this pocket. And I'm picking up what you're putting down, man. Any final words of wisdom that you want to add to this one? Because I feel like we've already gone way over time, but I could turn this into a full episode, just you and me, man.
We could, man. We definitely could. Man, to drill down one final point on that, like you said about the street and the pocket or whatever, one other story of another Brisbane story, man. Like, man, I had a deal in Goodna that I bought almost same time as that unit that I bought in 2019. So I bought them both in 2019. I paid $190,000 for this house. I don't say this to gloat. I say this for a very specific reason. That was in an area that had 40% social housing. It was one of the worst streets in one of the worst pockets or worst suburb. But at the time, bro, it was 190 grand, 21 minutes from Brisbane CBD. It was all I could afford. I had a budget of 350K. And with that 350K, I bought a $155,000 unit in bloody Woodridge. And I bought a $190,000 3-bed, 1-bath house in Goodna. The 155 went to 450. I just sold the 190K purchase. I bought a house for 190,000, just sold it for 625,000. It more than tripled in a terrible street, in a terrible pocket of not a terrible suburb, but it's fine. But it was what it was, man. And like, I had the right property managers. In 5 years of ownership, I had one bad tenant. In 5 years of ownership, but it tripled in value, man. Don't get hung up on it needs to be the perfect street, the perfect all this sort of stuff. If the deal makes sense, you need to value it comparative to other properties in that pocket. Like that obviously. But man, it's one of these things. When the market moves, the market will. It's the old saying of like a rising tide lifts all boats in scenarios like this. And the funny thing was, it was a first home buyer that bought that property.
I was on the phone to my accountant literally just this morning.
Yeah.
That very first purchase, you and I've talked about this before, $62,500. It sounds like a joke. It's that cheap, right? Same deal. It was all I could afford.
Yeah.
We're getting that appraised now. It's looking like it's between 300 and 350,000 in a regional town in South Australia. That was in 2017.
5X?
Something like that.
You know what I mean?
It's insane.
Crazy, man.
But if you had to come to me and said, hey, is this a good deal? At the time, it's like, no, it's just literally all I can afford. But, and it's not a good pocket, not a good anything. It's pretty much exactly what you're talking about, but it still worked. One thing I do just want to clarify before we wrap it up. This does not mean just buy anything, spray and pray. Like, because if you're new into this could very easily be misconstrued into you can't go wrong in property. You can absolutely go wrong in property. I just feel like that caveat has to be put in there.
The crazy thing to reflect on with this, and it means it's an unbelievably crucial point that you made there, because that property that I paid $190,000 for, the owners bought that 10 years earlier in 2009 for $250,000. So in 10 years, they actually lost about 30% in value, but it was the timing of buying it at the right time. It's not just buying anything anywhere at any time. Strategically, I knew that market was moving into the next phase of its cycle, and it was looking very juicy. It had spent 12, 13 years without growth. Yeah, man, buying well and all the rest of the sort of thing, great yield for what it was. Like a lot of things stacked up with that asset at that point in time to make it, a really good purchase to be made. Man, it's a crucial point that just because it was cheap, it wasn't good. It was all these things that sort of stacked up, in its favor.
Man, Sammy, I know you and I are going to have a few more potties coming up soon, man. I'm looking forward to them. We've gone way over time, but Sam Gordon from APS, thank you so much for jumping on the show, bro.
Toddy, always a pleasure, mate. Thank you for having me.
God, that was a longer chat with Sammy, but it was a good one. He's picking a 4-bed, 2-bath house as far as the what's concerned. The where, same as Morgan's answer. He's talking Ballarat as well, which means it's another ding, 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 another win for Regional Victoria. So it's 3 for 3 for Regional Victoria so far. Is it going to stay the same or is that going to change? But as far as Sammy's why, the market's a lot softer and you can negotiate better discounts while still getting a good quality product at the moment. So now let's jump straight into this one with Steve Ash and find out what, where, and why. Is he going to be another pick for Regional Victoria, or is he going to be our first to back Metro Melbourne? Steve Ash, how you going, man?
Yeah, excited. Yeah. I'm doing well. It's very dry in Brisbane. We haven't had any rain for weeks. How are you?
Man, we had rain this morning. You want to swap? Yeah. It's cold here.
We do want to swap. Yeah, it's warm here, but then I like the warm, but we could do with a bit of rain. So it's good. I'm excited to be on this one. I think we've got a lot to talk about.
Absolutely, mate. Well, we're talking about a place that's pretty synonymous for having 4 seasons in one day. So I don't know if it's appropriate starting it with the weather as far as the conversation is concerned, but $650K budget. The interesting thing about this, and Steve and I were just chatting about this off air, is it's one of the few places in the country that this is even really applicable. Because if you had a $650K budget budget in Sydney, it's not do I go metro, do I go like regional? It's you're going regional. There's no choice in the matter. And I think this is going to be a really interesting one to unpack. But before we get into your what, your where, and your why versus regional and metro, is there anything you really wanted to set the stage with, Steve?
Well, yeah, and I would like to actually, because I think it's going to be an interesting topic. And we did touch on this in another episode that I don't think all regionals are kind of built equal. And if we kind of look at, say, the big regional centres in proximity to Melbourne, we've got Geelong, we've got Ballarat, we've got Bendigo, Shepparton. I'm sure people know all about that. But I'd almost equate somewhere like Geelong to be a little bit different. And the reason being, if you look at, say, Geelong and the proximity into the CBD, it's almost the same in commute time by train as Frankston would be. And I know this because I used to commute from Frankston. And I had these two network dudes who I worked with at Goldman, and they kind of commuted from Geelong, and we'd have the same sort of travel time. And so I think it's very, we want to think about apples and apples a little bit here. So I wanted to call that out. I hope I'm not cheating, Todd, but yeah.
No, I mean, because it's an interesting one, because whenever I think of Geelong as a, like you said, Bendigo or Ballarat or one of the equivalents. And as far as the kilometres is concerned, was it like 75 Ks with Frankston versus like 50-ish K, something like that. So it's like, okay, it is a lot further, but like you said, the commute is pretty much the same thing. And let's face it, it's the time that it takes to actually get back and forth that really is the thing that counts.
Well, it is. And, I remember doing that. I was reading all the books, God knows, and that's kind of why I'm well read, but it is what counts. And then if you kind of look at, I always kind of, I don't know if it's a great comparison, but I always kind of equate Geelong to a Newcastle, and they say Newcastle's 2 hours from Sydney. Geelong's only an hour commute time from Melbourne. And then you've got Torquay, Bells Beach, the Bellarine Peninsula, and there's so much that's going for it. So while I love Geelong, I'm not going to use this as my place to sort of, my selection here. I'm still going to go Melbourne and the suburbs there, and we can unpack that a little bit, but I just wanted to make that distinction before we get into it.
Okay, fair enough, man. And that is a really good one for all of us to know. So as far as what are you buying, Steve?
Well, we're still kind of heavily focused in Melbourne, and the way I kind of look at things is for clients, I don't want this to, but I look at everything. If I was investing and putting my hard-earned money or my grandchildren's inheritance on the line, if you will be, I would be putting at 650, I'd still go into Melbourne. Now, we've seen, obviously, this time last year, we started buying in Melbourne, and we've obviously seen a number of areas that kind of raise up. We're just talking about it beforehand, like Broady. Frankston North was around 540 this time last year. So basically, Melbourne is moving. I think that's one of the important things. We're not seeing the bottom of the market anymore. We're in a rising market. So all of a sudden, 650K is getting harder and harder to sort of buy in Melbourne. So for my money as an investor, that's kind of how I'd look at where I'd be buying. And so what it would be at the moment, it would be houses within Melbourne in areas that haven't seen that substantial growth, where there's still sort of value, maybe houses on slightly smaller plots, run more houses in lower socioeconomics on bigger plots, but then also look at those kind of villa sort of unit townhouse plays in some certain areas where they're still extremely cheap. So I think there's a mix of everything, and people with budgets up to 650, there's still a number of different asset classes which they can actually buy.
Can I drill down on that a little bit? So if you're going potentially houses on bigger plots in lower socioeconomic areas, and if we're talking about, I'm assuming then with this budget, we're going very outer to Melbourne. We'll get into the where in just a second. But then versus maybe like villas or townhouses, if you had to lean into one, does it come back to like one is superior, one is inferior, or is it more a case of depends on what you're trying to achieve?
I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So basically, property investing, it's about a means to an end. Your portfolio is the beast. It's the thing that's going to get you to that sort of financial freedom where you attain your goals. And you always need a bit of capital growth, or sometimes you need a bit of cash flow. Now, with these assets, you will get that capital growth, but it really is kind of a case of looking at your portfolio and realizing what type of asset is going to get you. Let's just say you've got a couple of properties. What type of asset is going to get you to IP number 4, number 5 in that scenario? And so it might be that you need deposits. And so here we might look at maybe more of a house play in a capital growth, or it might just be your serviceabilities. You starting to have a bit of struggle there. And so then might then go and pivot to say maybe your sort of your villa, your unit, your townhouse, or whatever that's going to give you that. So you've always just got to be mindful that and not get emotional about it. You just got to be, you're kind of laser focused on what asset is going to get you to your goals.
Beautiful. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about as far as the what's concerned before we move down to the why?
No. I think I think 650 is getting harder and harder in Melbourne. So sometimes we're having to be a bit more creative in areas, but I think we've covered all of that.
All right, Steve. So you're looking at a house, potentially a villa. So obviously this is going to be dependent on what the person's trying to actually achieve for their investment. investment goals. Now, whereabouts are you buying this in Metro Melbourne?
Okay, so if it's my own, there's a number of different options in Melbourne, and we could cover them. It's probably a slice in itself. But if I had to look at the budget 650, I want to get into the best area I can get into. And so at the moment, I'd probably have Werribee as that place. I like Hoppers as well. They're obviously right next to each other, but Hoppers is probably a bit getting too expensive at that 650 mark. So I'm going to go Werribee.
Werribee. Now, there was something very interesting you said in an episode. This is probably going back about a year ago now. The difference between Werribee and Werribee South. It might seem like there is no difference, but from what you and I talked about back then, there's quite the difference. Do you mind expanding on that?
Yeah, no, they're both in Wyndham Vale. Werribee South are they're outside of Point Cook. They take generally houses on smaller plots of land, quite big sort of purchase prices. Land cost is a lot there. Werribee's a lot older and kind of established. You've got the train line there that goes right into the CBD. It's a vast train line. There's a bit more housing commission around the sort of station. You've got the birdcage, the infamous birdcage, which is maybe a bit more of a no-go zone, but still you can make money in these areas. But there's some really nice pockets in Werribee, and you've got the shopping centre there. You've got one of the better schools in Melbourne in Suzanne Corrie. So they're two very different areas. Just think like in every sort of kind of city we've got them, but Werribee South, much more newer type properties, a lot more supply, a lot more land out that way. Werribee kind of a lot more condensed.
Okay, so as far as Werribee South is concerned, you're looking at potentially a lot more newer builds, a lot more stock coming onto the market, where Werribee itself, a lot more established. It's like you're saying, it's basically the supply-demand ratio isn't going to be messed with the same way anytime soon.
No, it's not. And those price points in Werribee South are a hell of a lot more than sort of the Werribee. We're looking sort of 850, 900 or so, sort of median, I think. I'd have to look that up, but that's off the top of my head. That's what it was when I last looked at it.
So the 650 budget's not even working anyway.
No, exactly. So we're looking at kind of like if we can get an area sort of in Werribee, you can still get a house on that 600 square meters of land, sometimes even 700. Then if you kind of take that Werribee South sort of comparison, where these kind of house and land is sometimes on 300, 400 square meters, then potentially there might be something you could do with that land, or even put townhouses, whatever you want to call them, and then really kind of to realize the value of that land down the track.
Fantastic, man. All right, so 650,000. We're looking at a house. We're looking in Werribee, and so we're only looking. What's Werribee like? 30 minutes away from Melbourne? 35, something like that?
Yeah. About on the train, 35 minutes. It's a fast train line. There's obviously, we've covered it in other episodes. There's a bit of work to easing sort of like, travel into the CBD there. Yeah, I think it's 30Ks.
All right, so 650K budget. It's a house. It's on a decent block of land, 600, potentially even 700 square meters. And we're talking around the Werribee kind of region in Melbourne, Metro Melbourne. My big question now, why Metro Melbourne? Why 30 odd minutes away from town? Why not Bendigo? Why not Ballarat? Why not Shepparton? Why is this the choice?
Well, I've always kind of stamped my sort of investor sort of like colours to the mast, if you will. And I'm a big believer in Metro, and I just think the infrastructure and looking at various times, I think you've got liquidity factor. So if you did need to sort of recycle that asset for whatever reason, from what I've seen in my investing career, it's much easier to do that in one of these centres. Secondly, really, we're looking at amenities. Like we've got, and while regional centres do have these, there's a plethora of these sort of areas within Melbourne itself where you've got this. Say you've got good schools. We just talked about Suzanne Corrie, for example, in Werribee, one of the better schools out there. You've got Westfields, you've got good hospitals, etc., and a lot more sort of choice and variety. So I think that's a big thing. One thing we did touch on, sort of, and I think it might be a bit controversial, sort of like, and we don't want to go too much into this, but we have seen some very good times in Australia over the last few years, and in my small sort of investing mind, I've always kind of bought into this sort of black swan sort of thing, and I think if there potentially could be, not at the moment, I think everything's going swimmingly, but with geopolitical situation and things, there could be a black swan event in the next few years. And if that does happen, I'd much rather be in a metro area because it is easier to recycle it. Like if unemployment goes up, much easier to get a job in these big centres, etc. And I think that needs to be a factor in people's thought process. The other thing I wanted to touch on as well is I see investing as a real long-term sort of thing. And so I think sometimes sometimes at the whim in these regional centres, like where kind of prices do very well, then they go flat for a period. And then if we are kind of caught up in, say, if a bad event does happen, then I think slow and steady growth and just buying somewhere that's very undervalued, where you're buying in a lot of these areas at land cost or getting a house for 50 grand. I think what you'll see is slow and steady over the next 10 years. And for me, that helps me sleep at night. And that's what I want to see as really the foundations of my portfolio. So I'm happy to look at that. If we look at Melbourne, it's a 5.9% long-term capital growth rate over 30 years. Werribee over the last 10 years is around that sort of low sixes, I think 6.2% or 6.1. I'm quite happy with those returns. I don't need to sort of get, I've just bet 100 grand in a suburb of Bendigo, for example. I'm quite happy just kind of staying a course and building a strong foundational portfolio.
Okay, so it sounds like a lot of the backing to your why is almost a turtle in the hair type philosophy. If I can just like sort of simplify the hell out of it. I know there's more to it, a lot more to it than what you're saying, but then to also bolt on a little bit more, we're also looking at the shell that turtle has and kind of going, this is a bit of added protection just in case. It's not saying anything is about to go wrong because no one knows that anyway. But if it does, then you've got that little bit of extra pop in the shell. You're safe. There's something, there's some protection there. Whereas the regional centers, not the same kind of economic protection. If we were to have some kind of a downturn, like a 2008 happen again, a 1980s GFC, what was it called in the 80s? I was only a child then. What was that?
That was black. That was very different. I think, were you talking about the Black Monday event?
I don't know.
In the stock market?
It was the whole recession we needed to have, that one.
Oh, okay. So that's the Australian. I think I was just a baby really in the UK at that mark, but you are right, the recession that we needed to have. But it's really just keeping it simple, stupid, really, and just going in. There's decent populations in these areas anyway. You're close to Melbourne CBD, and I just think if something like this did happen, don't get me wrong, like I've worked with some of the best economists in the country, and they don't get it right. I've got no hope. I just kind of like the feeling is if something does happen, and unemployment does start creeping up for whatever reason, I'd much rather be in one of these areas. And I think it's not a bad thing to have properties or well-located properties in Melbourne with those sort of low growth rates, and just and trying to get your portfolio value up and just stay in the course, holding for a cycle. That's how wealth is built.
Love it. Is there any final words of wisdom or anything you wanted to add to this one, Steve, before we part ways today, mate?
Well, no, I think there's good options across Victoria. Obviously, I've got a bit of a preference for those Melbourne houses. I think one thing I'd like to just add, and we've got another episode, I think, where we've touched on this, but some of the villas units in areas like Dandenong as well. If I'm unable to just kind of fit them in there, you can get some pretty decent yields in there, some decent capital growth uplift as well, like around those 300. So I think that's something else.
And I just want to point out, this is the difficult thing for Steve and every other expert on this panel. I put everyone under pressure to make a choice. There is so many choices. And like just before, Steve and I were chatting about this, and he's kind of like, Todd, but this is working and this is actually really good, but it depends if you want to do this. So I get what you're saying, Steve, and just to fully acknowledge this is about honing in on one potential option, not necessarily the only option. Your situation is unique, and you need to make sure you're getting the right expert advice from your expert team before you make any kind of a decision. But Steve, Ash, thank you so much for jumping on the show and opening up Werribee, a house, $650K budget with a nice little hedge against if anything was to happen, plus just taking advantage of that value discrepancy like we very quickly touched on at the start between metro and regional. It doesn't exist in a lot of the other states, the kind of similarities in the price. So why not jump on that while it's there? Steve Ash from Property Strats, thanks so much for your time, mate.
Pleasure, Todd. Thanks for having me.
So for Steve, as far as his what, a house or a villa? Always the contrarians. One of the things I like about Steve, he spots value. As far as the where, we're talking in Werribee, no pun intended. So he's the first on the list to back Metro Melbourne over regional Victoria. And as far as his why, stripping it all back to its basics, good infrastructure and really steady growth. Now let's keep this episode moving and chat with Rohit to find out what, where and why. Regional Victoria or Metro Melbourne? Rohit, welcome back, man. How you going?
Thank you, Todd. Yeah, doing good.
Mate, it's good to have you on the show here. And I know that you've got a very interesting take on this panel, which is one of the reasons I actually wanted you on it, because you're not going to really unpack the answer that people are expecting, but it's one of the answers that I think people should be aware of. Is there anything you wanted to really set the stage with before we get into the what, the where, and the why, mate?
Hey, Todd. So I'll be picking up a suburb, which is going to sound unusual, and many people basically overlook that. But there is a massive hidden opportunity that I see there. So just hear me out and I'll provide my explanations why I think this is really a good potential for people to consider.
Okay, man, you've definitely piqued my interest. So before we get into the where, tell me a little bit more about the what. Are we talking units, houses, townhouses? What is this?
Only houses. So I'm talking about a freestanding existing dwelling, and I'm talking a 4-2-2 configuration, 4-bed, 2-bath, 2-car park modern home.
All right, so we're talking a 4-bed, 2-bath house, 2 car parks, a few years old. We're practically talking brand new if we're talking sort of 3, 4, 5 years old. It's just worn in. Let's cut the suspense. Where are we talking about?
Yeah, see, if we were having this recording 6 months ago, we would have been thinking Craigieburn and Volat as my choice of suburbs.
Okay.
But since the market has moved, we have now priced out. So there are still opportunities, but probably not for 650 budget.
Got
we have
it.
to be at least in high 600s in order for us to buy something there now.
Okay, so the Craigieburn side of things still works really well for you, but given the 650 cap that we've got in this episode,
we have to go a bit further out.
Okay, so how further? Where are we going?
We are probably looking another 5-7 Ks from on Hume Highway up north, and I'm choosing a suburb of Kalkallo.
Okay. Tell me about this, because I've got a feeling, unless you're from Melbourne, there's probably a lot of people that haven't really looked into Kalkallo.
Yeah, and the reason is because it's usually a very small suburb in comparison to the other neighboring suburbs, right? See, the other suburbs are a lot more popular, but the beauty of this suburb is that it is master planned community by Stockland. So it's very, very, very planned community. It is sitting right next on Hume Highway. So the connectivity to the city and up, if you're going up north towards Sydney, is again very, very good. Like in a couple of minutes, you can just be on Hume Highway. So connectivity wise, geographically, it is very well placed.
Okay. I've got to say though, Rohit, you're not painting the picture of the standard investment. This is sounding very reminiscent of off the plan vibes, maybe a few years after it's come off the plan. What's the opportunity that you're seeing here?
Yeah, see, the opportunity here is that we are currently looking at assets which are like for given our budget, we are looking at land size of around 350 to 380 square meters.
Yeah.
Targeting properties between 5 to 10 years old. So the properties that we are acquiring in this suburb for our clients under 650 budget, these properties are massively undervalued. And when I say massively undervalued, I'm referring to the cost of the land and the bill. And we are probably looking at 70 to 100 grand lower than what its replacement or replication cost would be. And when I say replication cost, all I'm meaning is that if somebody is trying to buy a land and trying to build a house there with similar specs, it is going to be costing them around 70 to 100K conservatively on this land size.
So 70 to 100 grand, you're talking as far as a difference with replacement costs. So that's already not bad. But does this change at all if we change the budget?
Yes, it certainly does. So because we are very tight on our budget, right? So we are just entering into the suburb with some basic homes. When I'm saying basic homes, like we are looking at 350 square meter land size here. But once we start increasing our land size and our budget, then we are like the savings can be even bigger. So I remember acquiring an asset for a client of ours where we have secured a 450 land size, like a build of 4 years old on a 450 land size at only 725, where the replication cost would have been around 900,000 easily, right? So you are in that case, you are probably looking at around 175,000 cheaper. But again, it changes with the changing budget.
Obviously outside of the 650, but I get what you're saying. Okay, so as much as this is not the stereotypical kind of property investor asset, and in most parts of the country you'd be steering away from this, you're basically looking at this going, I couldn't build it for that. So, and okay, so talk to me a little bit more about the land side of things then, because if we're pushing this far out, I can already hear the comments being typed about, but how much extra land is there? This is going to kill the supply demand. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I'll touch upon that now. Like if you start looking at Google Maps and type Kalkallo there, you would clearly understand how big or small of this suburb is, right? So there is not much developable land after what is currently being released, right? And also if you start looking at the data side of things, strengths, right? The socioeconomics are really great. We are talking about 6.5 to 7 of a socioeconomic score out of 10, right? So we are talking about 65 to 70%, which is above average, right? So the socioeconomic score is good. Also, the owner occupancy is higher. So we are talking 79% owner occupancy in this particular suburb. So only 21% renter, which is actually, again, a very good equation for investor to be in. So affordability index is another interesting parameter here for us to look into, and this is 31 years. And this is basically based on the current interest rate, median incomes and median house prices. The incomes are high, the house prices are not super high, so they are really, really affordable.
Sorry, how many years?
31 years.
31 years. Now, can you give us some contrast? Let's go to another area. Like if we were to take that over to Adelaide, to Brisbane, to Sydney, where else is that so we can actually put this into a bit of perspective?
Oh, yeah. So if we are talking Brisbane these days, where there is a very big disparity between median incomes and house prices, if you are talking north of Brisbane, 15-20 kilometers, we could be touching this number to 45 or 50. And that is the reason why, like Brisbane, I personally think is also a lot more unaffordable in comparison to Sydney, because median incomes in Sydney is much more higher, though the prices are higher. But in comparison, Brisbane, I think the affordability index in some suburbs are touching 50.
So we're talking about a third to it pushing almost close to like half as long a time to actually pay off the mortgage with the average income in the area.
Yeah. Anything under 30 or closer to 30 is considered really good.
And you know, the other thing that gets me about this as well is like, if like take your property investment hat off for a second and like send this episode to someone that is maybe a first home buyer that's wanting to get into the market. Like you're talking about areas that I'm sure, like we're having a look at this now, like you can even get houses in the 5s pretty easily. Like, and so if you're a first home buyer, especially with the whole 5% deposit scheme going on, but even if you don't have the 5% deposit scheme, you can potentially get into something for like well under $100,000 deposit. You've got a mortgage that's probably going to be like not too much different to rental repayments in a lot of cases, depending on where you're renting. And how long is it taking you to get into the city if you need a commute?
So we are talking only 35 kilometers. Again, depending upon the time of the day, but you might be just in the city in less than an hour.
And I just want to make one thing really clear. Normally, areas like this, no go. Stay away. It's like it's not going anywhere. And this is what Rohit and I are talking about. And Rohit's really bringing to your attention is basically there's an opportunity in here that is not normal. And that is correct. That is
correct. Yeah. Another parameter that I want to talk about is the Stockholm market, right? So our usual thinking is because this suburb was being developed in the last 5-10 years and there are still subdivisions happening by Stockland, of course, the Stockholm market would really be high, right? But if I tell you the Stockholm market percentage, it really surprises me. It is only 0.65%, which is very, very good.
Yeah, right.
Inventory levels are also 1.5 months, which is again very healthy.
Yeah, right. Okay. Mate, so as far as the why are you picking this over Ballarat, Geelong, Bendigo, going out regional somewhere else? Okay.
See, I'm a big fan of regional cities, honestly, right? Don't take me wrong on that. But when it comes to Melbourne, I've got a very different viewpoint, right? My whole portfolio, 1/4 of my portfolio is sitting in regional, and we have really had massive growth, right? So regional and capital, according to me, are just definitions, because if you look at COVID, we have the best growth cities have been regional. They were Byron Bay, they were Gold Coast, and anything outside of capital is classified as regional, right? So it's just a definition. But when it comes to Melbourne versus Regional Vic, I personally am more inclined towards Metro Melbourne. The reason is because if I start comparing the price points and the yields in these regional cities with similar socioeconomics, which I was discussing, around 7 out of 10, I'm looking at very similar price points and also very similar yields. And also in these cities, you still have got land tax consequences, right? So your net cash flow sits very close to what it is going to be here. Like we might be differing by maybe $20-30 per week, but that's it. Nothing else.
So you're basically looking at this going, if I can get into Metro Melbourne for a similar price to regional Victoria, why aren't I getting closer? Because that price disparity just isn't there the way that it is in so many other states.
That is so true. And see, you really cannot be comparing. You cannot compare Sydney, or say Sydney is an extreme example, being a world-class city, right? But you cannot really compare the economy of Melbourne, the job opportunities, the industry of Melbourne with the regional towns in Victoria, or even with the regional cities in NSW.
I feel like that was a subtle little stab at Melbourne from as a Sydney guy there. It's like Sydney's the world city, not Melbourne. But
no, it definitely is. It definitely is, and they're very comparable, right? And I think that is pushing, that is making me a lot more interested in Melbourne these days, even for my personal portfolio. My recent personal purchases have been in Melbourne for exactly the same reason, because in terms of of the economy size, I see both these cities very, very comparable. And from job opportunity, price, the income levels, I also see them very comparable.
I'm only joking.
Price disparity.
Yeah, I'm only joking with you anyway, mate. I'm from Adelaide. I can't really talk. But
yeah. The price disparity is huge.
And it is. And this is where I see what you're saying really come to life, because the asset you're talking about, it's not really standard what we generally talk about on this show. And I actually don't think we ever have talked about this kind of stuff before. The location, the newer development, there's still so much land. Again, like all of these are normally crosses when you're looking for an investment. But the one thing that I get where you're coming from can kind of turn that potential around is purely because it's like, hey, I couldn't build it for that. It's a value play that's just under a different umbrella than what we would usually be looking at, which I actually think, Rohit, it's one of the things that you're bringing a very different level of interest to the table with this, mate. And maybe someone else on the panel is going to talk about this, but I don't think they are. And it's why I think that it might not be the right thing for you. As we always say, this is not financial advice. Please seek independent professional financial advice. But maybe it's something that's worth looking into for a lot of people.
Yeah, very true. And see, you need a stronger motivation to move to any market, right? Like if somebody has to sell me Regional Vic over Metro, like what is the main driver? I think the only driver at the moment for people is a short-term capital growth play, but that is relevant for people who are wanting to build their portfolios, right? But if someone is wanting something with mid to long term of investment and is really not banking on its equity, then Melbourne could be a better play, because you might be looking at much like longer and sustained growth, because Melbourne is the immigration capital of Australia. Melbourne is the university capital of Australia, right? It has got the most universities. It is getting the maximum number of students compared to all other comparable cities. So, and these students, right, many of them end up settling here for good. Initially, they are renters for a couple of years, and then they start eventually buying homes. So the demand is always consistent and there for Melbourne.
Love it. Rohit from Investor Aid, thank you so much for jumping on the show, mate. It's always a pleasure.
Todd. Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure chatting, Todd.
Rohit's choosing a 4-bed, 2-bath, 2-car park house in Kalkalor. I got to say, this is definitely deviating from the pack, but I can kind of understand where he's going with it. And this is for Metro Melbourne. So right now it's 3 against 2. As far as his why is concerned, solid logic to this. There's Metro price points are pretty similar to regional price points, which I can't help but think there's a lot of you guys thinking as well. So let's wrap things up with Dawn Fouhy and see, is she going to make this episode a tie with Metro Melbourne, or is she backing Regional Victoria? Dawn Fouhy, how you going?
Todd, what is the crack?
That is never going to change, and I hope it doesn't, Dawn. The crack is today 650,000. Actually, I don't even know what is the crack, if it means. This is an Irish colloquialism that I may be completely misinterpreting. So,
no, you're not.
Okay, good. All right.
It's kind of like, how's it going? Like, what's happening? Any news?
I was answering it correctly then. I'm happy. I'll continue. The crack is 650K to spend. Do we go Regional Victoria or do we go Metro Melbourne? You and I have been having a few chats about this, and I know there's a couple of things you really want to set the stage with. So do you want to jump straight into it now? And you tell me a few of the bits that you're actually thinking before we get into the what, the where, and the why.
So for this budget, and it's really interesting, 650 like 2 years ago was like expensive. It was like, oh, it's 650. Now it's like the new 500K. And I think I'm seeing more and more people confused every day because they're like, where do I buy? What do I buy? And hopefully this brings some clarity to people. So what I would say is for this budget, and it's always going to be the regional versus metro story, but I found it really hard because so many areas in regional Victoria and Metro Melbourne are looking really good. It's all about the relative affordability to the other major capitals. So Metro Melbourne is like just looking so good. It's 60% cheaper than Sydney at the moment. It's cheaper, relatively cheaper than Brisbane and Adelaide. Population 5.5 million. Lots of jobs here. And
isn't it forecast to be something like 8 million by 2040 or something like that? I might not quite have that right. That is right.
No, that is spot on, and we're still behind in building. Now, Victoria is really good at building new homes, but we're still very much behind with the building of those homes. As far as the metro versus regional, it all depends on the type of investor you are. So I'm seeing more and more how busy people are in their lives. So they're working, they're trying to juggle family, or they're in uni, and a lot more people are actually drawn towards set and forget houses. So what I mean by that is newer homes in in higher socioeconomic areas, better tenants, and just easygoing style of investing. I'm seeing more people attracted to that.
And Dawn's absolutely right with this, because whilst there is definitely going to be a side on either part of this, there is also a factor of what kind of investor are you? What are you actually looking to achieve? Are you wanting to roll up your sleeves? Are you not wanting to roll up your sleeves? So I hear what you're saying. You basically, like, there is no one size fits all. However, for what you've put together today, do you want to maybe describe the kind of investor that this would be a really good suit for before we get into the what, where, why?
I think this is great for you're a first-time investor, you're building out your career, you're focused on growing your career, your business to improve your borrowing capacity to buy more property, and you just want to time a market really well where there's really low stock and it's very affordable for the local population, and it's an area that has major infrastructure in place already, but also infrastructure coming. Infrastructure means jobs.
Yep.
Jobs is wage growth is house growth. So I just want people to focus on the fundamentals and keep it simple. And always remember as well, with any sort of data that I'm going to talk about, this data is lagging. So, you know, the artist formerly known as CoreLogic, now Cotality, like that's like a few months old. So let's not get our, you know, knickers in a knot over data. I can tell you as well how many people are queuing up for these houses on the ground.
Did you see the other day what they released at 12-month growth rate for Melbourne as a whole was literally 0%. I read that. I'm like, that's not right. But
not right.
No. Anyway, that's a whole different episode that we can tackle. So as far as the data lag's concerned, this is a brilliant point that Dawn actually raises. But with the data that you do have in front of you and that we do have at our disposal, can we start with the what? What are you actually buying for $650?
So you can buy a 4-bed, 2-bath house in the 2000s on, you know, 500, 600 square meters, backyard, higher socioeconomic, you know, pocket of, we're talking about Ballarat, and you can just get a really nice house there.
Okay. And so a 4-bed, 2-bath, and so you're not talking about something that is like 30, 40, 50 years old. When you say 2000s, you mean like 20, 25 years old?
Yeah, like you're basically getting the land for free. And Todd, as you would know with your latest renovation adventures, how much all of that can blow out to, and how your feasibility is old as soon as you write it down your little notepad.
Yeah, if you're not into renovations and really controlling the budget, just stay away from them. And this is exactly why I back what you're saying. You know, I love renovation through and through. I've built the entire portfolio on it. Well, Bianca and I have. I shouldn't take all credit for it. Bianca and I have built it. But it's not for everyone. And if you are more mum, dad, set and forget, I can see where you're going with this already, because your maintenance bills are going to be significantly less. As far as your Victorian minimum rental standards are concerned, more than likely everything's going to be compliant. There's a whole list of boxes that are ticked on this. Your value add, not going to be there the same way, but if you don't want to roll up your sleeves, you don't want to subdivide, renovate, do any of these things, why pay for something that you're not going to utilize?
Correct. And don't get me wrong, there is great value in Metro Melbourne for the $650 mark, but you're going to be paying for the land value. So you're going to get a 3x1 potentially smaller house that does need the renovation, but yes, you're going to get 650 square meters, but that might not be for every investor. And also the yield, well, the yield across Victoria, like, let's not, you know, be backwards and coming forwards. It's pretty shocking. But what I'm realizing more and more is that the yield compression is happening across the country, Todd. So what we're actually seeing, and I don't see that changing, because the house values are rising so much, the yields are getting more and more compressed.
And it's realistically, it's generally how it works. You'll find, like, historically, you go back and you look at a lot of the markets that didn't rise for a very long time. Your Adelaides, your Logans, like Brisbane, those areas, they still had incremental rental increases, and the yields got significantly better and better and better, slowly over time, over the years. But the prices just pretty much stayed the same. And it's like, until we actually have the burner sort of slow down a little bit with the real estate market and rents can start to slowly rise again, unfortunately, I think I'm with you. I don't think we're going to see 7 and 8% yields again anytime soon. No,
I think possibly, you know, in the next 5 to 6 years, maybe you will, as more investors are unfortunately priced out of investing. You know, we're having an affordability crisis across the country. So this flight to affordability is continuing for investors, for first home buyers, and for upsizers, downsizers, everybody in the market. Everybody's competing. And the interesting thing is the queues are for the newer stock. So if your family me, if you're a couple, people just want easy going and a place to call home in a nice area that they always, that they want to live in.
Tell me a little bit more about the where, because you've already said Ballarat. Ballarat is still a pretty big place. As far as a regional spot, it's also got some pretty decent proximity to Melbourne. So as much as you probably wouldn't really commute, live in Ballarat and work in Melbourne, if you need to go to Melbourne, it's an hour and a bit down the road. It's not that far away.
It's not that far, but I think where people forget as well that not everybody works in the city. So we're talking about a huge city that's Ballarat City that's undergoing a hospital redevelopment. It's getting an extra 100 beds. That's jobs. People actually live and work in Ballarat. Or they might work in Geelong. Geelong is like an hour from Ballarat, so you can get to the coast in an hour from Ballarat. You can get into the city in 90 minutes, depending on who's driving. But, not everybody wants to live in, the urban sprawl of a CBD. And I think moving forward, these regional areas are really going to see a resurgence in people moving out there for affordability, more house on land for what they're going to get in Metro.
$650,000. We're talking about a 4-bed, 2-bath, 600 square meters in Ballarat that's relatively new. Whereabouts in Ballarat we going? This
is always one of my favourite spots, and it is Alfredton. So I really like this for the relative affordability to what people earn. And if you're a novice investor out there and you're like, how do you know this stuff or how do you look it up? Just hop onto the ABS website, search a suburb. It'll tell you how much somebody earns a week there and what their mortgage repayment is. And you can work out the relative affordability based on that. You can also, have a chat to the real estate agents, property managers, find out who's actually living there, if that correlates with the data, if you're somebody who wants to have a look into that yourself. But really like it because the vacancy rate's around 2%. I think the vacancy rate is rising a little bit there because investors are seeing the value there. That's quite common when an area looks really good, and it will drop again as it becomes more unaffordable.
Can we actually quickly touch on that, Dawn? Because I think you're bringing up a brilliant point here, because this is something like that is worth speaking of, because sometimes when a whole bunch of people are buying into an area, and I even say a whole bunch, it can only be like an extra 20 people buying, but if those 20 people all list their properties for rent at the same time, then all of a sudden renters have got a lot more choice. So it's potentially going to actually affect A, what you're getting, and B, how long it actually takes to let it out. But that doesn't mean that that's going to stay that way forever. Do you mind kind of talking to a little bit of that short-term effect versus the long-term goal?
For sure, because I think people get put off because they're searching for perfection. So there's no suburb that's going to meet every single metric for you, or no house that's going to be perfect. So you really need to set your standards on just focusing on the fundamentals. As far as vacancy rate increasing, that stock will get mopped up again. And why will it get mopped up? Because the prices are rising. Investors, the herd will move again and the vacancy rate will drop back down. It's just you may have to reduce your rent today to get your property rented out quicker. But I always look at what will the rent be in the future. Okay, it's not just what will the rent be today. So just be realistic with the vacancy rate. A vacancy rate of less than 2.5 is actually pretty normal.
And this is what's the term? I was going to use the term bubble, but that sounds very controversial. I mean bubble as in like the real estate bubble, echo chamber is probably what I'm going for, that you and I kind of live in. And the past 5 years of real estate, 0.5, 0.7, like these are normal vacancy rates. They're not normal historically. They are insanely low. So if you are seeing a vacancy rate of more like 2%, 2.5%, in contrast to like 0.4, of course that looks insane. It's like 5 times the amount, but it's actually more of a normal vacancy rate. And this is what you're saying, that when you see this kind of stuff, don't get shocked. It's just, this is how the game is generally played.
Correct. And I really want people to focus on the livability of areas as well. I think we're really lost at the moment in the industry in a storm of data. And it's like, okay, but what are the schools like? What are the facilities like to, raise a family? Or for you as a single person, is there really good sporting facilities? So in Ballarat, the Clarendon College is one of the top schools in Victoria consistently. You've got a population of 122,000 people. It's projected to increase by 40% by 2046 to 170,000.
Jesus, yeah, right.
So it's significant, but you'll see that projected. So they're already building that in with building approvals. This is what I want you to be careful of in Ballarat. So yes, there's some suburbs in Ballarat that are great for 650. 650, but there's some that you're not going to outperform in. So remember, you want to outperform. There's really high building approvals in, places like Winter Valley and all those kind of spots. Just be careful of those new estates that are popping up. They're popping up for the projected population growth and the demand in the area.
So the new estates are more like your stayaways, from what you're saying?
Well, just because I like to outperform the market, it is like I'm very strict on, for myself, building approvals and affordability. Affordability and infrastructure is my main thing. I want there to be lots of diversity of jobs for people and for it to be very affordable and for bang for buck. So I want to be getting the land for free.
Love it. So I feel like we've talked about the what, we've talked about the why, we've talked about the where, we've kind of talked about a bit of the why scattered throughout this conversation. But as far as the why would you pick this with the budget versus Metro Melbourne? I want to dig a little bit deeper into that.
It all depends on the type of investor you are. I think I'm really talking to the set and forget investor. And, don't get me wrong at all. I think that, and I think what a lot of people are going to say, yeah, but why would you spend that regionally when you can buy Metro Melbourne for 650 as well? And it's like how willing you are to pull up your sleeves. So I think they're both going to grow really well. And this is what I said to you. I never sit in the fence. I don't want to get splinters, but this was really difficult because I see so much opportunity everywhere now. So when I put the lens on of we are in a really tough time in Australian real estate. So because there's so many markets running at once. So people forget the Australian real estate market isn't one market. There's at least 5 or 6 markets running concurrently. Okay. And we're in an affordability crisis, a supply crisis, immigration. It's an exciting time to be an investor. I feel really bad for first home buyers. But if you're an investor, you want to outperform, go for a newer product and just hold that bad boy and you will see the gains.
So as far as the yield in Ballarat and the cash flow side of things, I want to just quickly talk about that because 4 and 2 as well. You can rent a 4-bed if you need a 3, but you can't rent a 3 if you need a 4. So you're opening yourself up to a whole other section of the market that you wouldn't if you had a 3-bed 1-bath. But what kind of cash flow are we talking about? Because Melbourne's not exactly known for amazing yields.
No, and unfortunately the yield in Ballarat is probably the lowest along with Geelong in the regions. That's today though. So I'm really looking at the affordability of it. It hasn't had the rental growth. So if you're buying for 650, you're probably only getting a rent of 480 today. Do I see those rents being 550, 600 over the next 2 years? Absolutely. Why? Because the prices are, increasing all the time and I'm going to see those rents rise. Your yield on purchase today will be miserable. Your yield in the future, great. Your capital growth, exceptional. Can you stomach it? Can you afford it? Is it right for you? This won't be right for every investor.
And this is one of the big things that Dawn's touching on right now as well. Talk to your broker because the last sentence, this won't be right for every investor. It's not to say that it's good or that it's bad. Talk to your broker about it because if you buying exactly what Dawn said means your broker goes, you're completely stuck, you're capped, you're stopping right now. Well then, if you're happy to stop, cool, maybe that is the right move. But if you want to then go again, you're just going to get yourself stuck and then you're going to be applying for one of the unstuck episodes and that's not exactly where you want to be. So you've got to make sure that the yield component is actually going to fit your overall plan because like you said, you're wanting to outperform the market, but you're wanting to do that by still growing a portfolio.
Correct. And as we'd said, a lot of these markets, Metro Melbourne, these regional Victorian ones, I can talk to, we put a Metro Melbourne asset in our super. I would put a regional Victoria asset in the super because it's at that stage of the cycle where you may not be holding this asset forever. But again, Todd, this is a whole other episode about are we long-term holding assets in Australia anymore? Or are we trading properties? Do we need a trading index for, trading our properties?
Again, that's a whole new episode. But as far as this one's concerned, you're spending $650, 4-bed, 2-bath, newer build in Ballarat, more specifically in Alfreton.
Correct.
And the reason why, it's more of a set and forget asset. You're getting into a higher socioeconomic area. Instead of going closer to Metro Melbourne, you're going into a regional spot, but a nicer pocket within a regional spot. And because of a lot of the growth projections as far as population's concerned, and a lot of other factors that I can't really say in a wrap up, there is a lot more potential here as well for capital growth over that longer term period. Is it
correct?
Anything else I've left left out? Anything else you want to chuck into this one before we part ways today, Dawn?
No, I just want people to remember that there's no best suburb. So I think that's a big fallacy. When an area is running, it will all grow. But there is pockets that will grow more because it's all to do with the local economy and it's to do with an LGA. I would get you guys to focus on an LGA rather than a particular suburb. I'm mentioning this suburb because it stood out to us as far as the best in the data.
Love it. Dawn Fouhy from Future Proof. Thank you so much for jumping on the show.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Todd.
You know, the biggest theme I'm seeing here now, 4-bed, 2-bath. So we've got Rohit 4-bed, 2-bath, Sammy 4-bed, 2-bath. Arjun was 3 and 1, but mainly 4-bed, 2-bath. Your 4 and 2s are not your traditional kind of investor stock. Common theme you want to consider? Maybe so. And as far as the area she's looking at, it's Ballarat again. This is 3 Ballarats for the win. And as far as her why is concerned, Alfredton specifically for her is a quality social economic area. Getting a quality house in a quality area, stacking those odds, making that 650 perform as much as it can for you. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. This has been such a big one with so many differing opinions and a question that I think is on the lips of almost every property investor in the country that's considering investing in Melbourne or Victoria right now. It's like we said several times in the episode. If you were to ask this question over in Sydney, it's like, oh, should I buy regional New South Wales or should I buy like Metro Sydney? It's like, unless your budget is in the millions, it's not even a question. It literally is a question in Victoria right now, in Melbourne right now. As Rohit's just pointed out, you get like pretty much brand new houses for like $500,000-$600,000, 4-bed, 2-baths. Or as Sammy's pointing out, there's markets right now in Ballarat that are still soft enough that you can push a deal. You can actually push for a better price and negotiate. Remember the days of negotiating like for better deals? It feels like so many locations, prices have been going up, but not everywhere if you know where to look. Taking Morgan's perspective on this one, the regional side of things with the yields being just that little bit better a lot of the time can potentially be that little game changer from adding another property to your portfolio or maybe tapping out before you want to. That's such a fantastic point to consider. As we always say, like chat to your broker, not just any broker. It's got to be an investment savvy broker. It's not about writing loans. It's about building portfolios. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode, and we could not do any of this if it wasn't for our amazing show sponsors. Right now, that is enough from me today. My name is Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and as always, have yourself an amazing rest of the week and stay awesome.